I wanted to do a video that's a little different today. It will touch on Palantir a little bit, but I think it's a super important video to do. Um, we're going to be talking about data privacy and ethics and accountability in AI research. And it's interesting that many of you probably don't know you're part of a huge AI experiment that's been going on probably for the better part of a decade. Um, and this all revolves around social media. If you've watched The Social Dilemma, you'll have a pretty good primer for what I'm going to talk about. But let's first kind of take a step back and kind of really understand what social media is, right? And it's fundamentally the application of graph theory on huge amounts of user data. And this is a graph. This is a modeled graph basically. And each of these little points is a node in the graph, and nodes are like entities. They're things. And in a lot of cases in social media, it's you, but then it's also your relationship to other people. It also has other things like likes and interests. And this forms a massive sort of knowledge tree or ontology. The lines connecting all these things, these entities, are known in graph theory as edges. And edges define the relationships between the nodes, right? And what's interesting about graphs when they're applied this way and they form these ontologies is that they are themselves a representation of knowledge. It doesn't mean that it's intelligent, but graphs can exhibit intelligent-like behavior. And in essence, we reverse engineer AI using these ontologies. So again, graphs themselves are like a representation of knowledge. They can exhibit intelligent-like behavior, including making predictions and recommendations. And you can use them to reverse engineer intelligence. And social media collects oodles and oodles and oodles of information about you and builds these graphs, right? And so, what is graph theory used for today? Well, we use it for recommendation engines. We use it for related content suggestions about products you might want to buy based on a product you already bought and that other people already bought. Understanding social networks. It's a big one, right? We use graph theory to deconstruct social networks and understand them. Network engineering. We use a huge AI research tool, right? Ontologies are kind of the backbone of AI research today. And again, that's because graphs are such a powerful representation of knowledge. There's countless additional use cases like persistent data structures and modeling state. This is sort of propeller hat kind of stuff that computer scientists use graph theory for. And what's interesting about graphs is that, if software is eating the world, graphs are eating software. Like graphs are showing up everywhere, back end to front end. We're seeing it used all over the place. Even the most popular front end framework today, React, heavily uses graph theory. And a lot of people who wrote React also wrote this thing called Immutable.js, which made persistent data structures a thing on the front end in JavaScript. So, graph theory is being used all over software, and I'm really, even myself, I'm having to relearn some graph theory to stay relevant today. So let's talk a little bit though about the state of what I call the worldwide graph, right? Because graphs are eating so much of software. It's really, when we talk about the World Wide Web, we're talking about a handful of companies, and we're really talking about the worldwide graph because these people share information. This is what that whole Apple controversy is about with Facebook right now. Like, why is Facebook so pissed off at Apple? Well, because they're denying them the ability to sort of track things between platforms. And all of this data that these companies collect about you form a digital twin of you because it connects everything you do, everything you say, everything you search for, all of your friends and connections. It really, like, using this tool is more powerful than any government related surveillance state that's ever been created, right? So you literally, if you're heavily using social media, you have a digital twin, and that knowledge, that sort of information can be used in positive ways, but it can also be used in some very negative ways. And so what are some of those negative effects, right? Well, they're not good. This man, Jonathan Haidt, if you're not familiar with him, he's a national treasure. I suggest you get to know him and his research. He's also featured in The Social Dilemma. But Haidt's research is really pointing to things that are terrible. Everything from increased suicidality to self-harm among young women to inflaming tribalism, and it's a hugely destabilizing force right now. And I can't summarize Haidt's research. You should really search out his material on YouTube along with the books he's written. I think The Righteous Mind is one of my favorite books ever. The Coddling of the American Mind, it's another great one. But let's take a quick look at some of his research. And I want you to pay really close attention to this date, 2009. Ask yourself what happened in 2009. What could it be that would cause all of these negative things to start increasing right around 2009? Could it be it was the inflection point for social media and smartphones? Could it be that, right? And so here we're looking at people aged 12 to 17 who've had a major depressive episode in the past year. That rate has been going up consistently since 2009. Look at the rate for girls, though. This is crazy, right? Hospital admissions for non-fatal self-harm among young girls. Same date, right? What happens in 2009? The stuff starts to go up, right? And let's also look at the suicide rate per 100,000, right? All this stuff starts to go up right around the same time. And what could it be about social media that could have those effects, right? Well, I actually think Haidt has a blind spot here. Just substitute the word social media with AI. Okay, what are the effects of AI on young women? What are the effects of AI on you? And you start to understand that this is a feature, not a bug. I don't mean that to be conspiratorial. What I mean is that the system is doing what it's designed to do. It just so happens that it's not a good thing for everyone. And I think this is important because you have to ask yourself, like, is big tech going to destroy their own IP? Like, if it turns out that this is not the way we should be doing things, how's big tech going to change itself? Well, to date, they've sort of, air quotes, attempted to fix the system, but by fixing the system, they're biasing their models and effectively compounding the problem. And so, like, the way they're trying to resolve these things are to make tweaks to either use heuristics, which is a fancy way of saying, like, whatever the model says, hit it with a hammer and do something else in these cases, or they're training the model in such a way that they'll bias it. And it doesn't seem to be making the problem go away. And it may be just compounding the problem. And also, it's the incentive structures in big tech. If you're an AI researcher, you take steps to actively not bias your models. And so, I think there's some ways we have to look at reform that go beyond looking at big tech to regulate itself, because the incentive structures simply aren't going to be there. It's important for AI researchers to be able to engage in research. But I think we can do this in a better way. And I think this starts with just stop collecting customer data. You should never have to give customer data to interact on what are now what I consider common carrier platforms, like Amazon Web Services and Google and Twitter, Facebook, any kind of platform tool today that's heavily leveraged for communications. They shouldn't need to collect customer data. And we're going to get into why they don't need to do that anymore. Which is this point number 2, decentralization. It's got an asterisk next to it because it's not 100% viable yet, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But the idea of decentralization is that I can build distributed compute, and I can leave data in the hands of the customer and let them sign transactions using cryptography in such a way that I don't need to collect data, and I can know that who I'm dealing with is who they say they are. And this might sound a lot like blockchain because it is. Okay, so decentralization is a thing that's happening now. They're calling it Web 3.0, but it's a long ways off. But it will be the thing that happens, the domino that falls, that enables point 1 here. The third thing we need to do is architect for privacy, and this is really on the shoulders of every software engineer. So if you're a software engineer and you're listening to this, this is for you. Okay, so there's a book Courtney Bowman wrote called The Architecture of Privacy. It's an O'Reilly publication. You need to read this because it's really the software engineer who's on the front lines that needs to advocate for privacy protections. You are going to outpace regulators forever. And so until you start understanding the principles of architecting for data privacy and start putting those into your Scrum and product meetings, injecting this into the conversation, nothing is going to change. And we really need to ask ourselves, should we be building platforms specifically designed to release dopamine hits on people who we have more information than God on? And is that a good thing? because it feels creepy to me, and it feels creepy to Bowman too. So I think if you're a software engineer, it's super important to start understanding that we need to architect for privacy first. The other thing here that's really unique, and this is tangentially, or it's actually parallel, it's related to Palantir, is this concept of IA and not AI. IA is intelligence augmentation, whereas AI is artificial intelligence. And we'll talk a second about the differences between those things. And also regulation. I'm not a huge regulation fan because I feel like it hinders my work. I feel like it makes it harder for as an engineer to deliver solutions to customers. But I think there's a place for it. And I think when we're talking about the effects of AI on the general population today, there is definitely some room there for some regulation. Um, Decentralized applications. So I kind of want to break down some of these points in these subsequent slides. So um, Dapps it's you'll hear this buzzword term around the industry right now, but essentially Dapps are built on Ethereum right now. That's the main platform for building decentralized apps. But they can enable some really neat use cases like passwordless login and payment without exchanging PII. So that's amazing. There's an old video out there if you're an engineer and you want to see like where some of these applications came from. Check out BitID. I think it's still on GitHub. But BitID was enabling passwordless login with crypto wallets years ago, right? It was a use case that came out of having a crypto wallet on your phone, right? And so the idea that I don't have to actually share my information with a company in order to interact with their platform because I'm using basically a signed message using asymmetric cryptography, that's really cool, right? Like there's no more need for a company to collect your name and address and phone number, anything like that. We can engage in transfers, including like, paying for items and engaging in fulfillment and shipping without the need for the company to store that information or anything else about you for that matter. So dApps are a super powerful tool, and I really would like to point out that the required infrastructure to make this a reality on a broad scale is a long way away. There might be some sort of intermediate steps that involve centralized authorities doing KYC, but not using the data under good regulations. That might be a like sort of intermediary step. Some other cool projects out there are Vendia. Tim Wagner started this. Tim Wagner created AWS Lambda, but he's tackling some really cool problems that deal with serverless networking and integrated blockchain. And I'm a big fan of this project. I think it could go a long way to build the compute required to build dApps that actually do interesting things beyond, exchanging cryptocurrencies or DeFi. King's distributed systems, awesome. They're enabling machine learning in universities by tapping unused compute, but they basically give you a job platform. This is what I like about King's is that you can create any number of jobs that have specific profiles for performance and get those distributed out to, say, networks, sort of isolated networks where the job consumers are pre-built with specific network configurations to allow you to do things like, machine learning on really large data sets, or maybe you have some other type of job you want to process using Kings. But anyway, these are just examples of projects that are out there to enable decentralization. It's a big deal. I think all of the smartest minds in computer science right now are really working, not all of them, but a lot of them are working on the decentralization problem. And this is going to be a transformative technology. There's just too many brilliant people producing too many brilliant things for this to go away. And then I also want to talk a little bit about IA, the IA alternative. So it is my belief that AI researchers are acting in good faith, right? But they just haven't considered the negative impacts of mimicking sort of human cognitive behavior on the actual human beings who interact with these systems. Okay, so AI is the process of mimicking human cognition, but we release that AI into the world when it starts powering content recommendation engines for you and putting things front and center in your feeds every day. And that interaction doesn't always produce positive results. And there is an alternative to this that is designed from the ground up to give human beings positive results, and that's IA, which is intelligence augmentation. It's an idea that's been around forever, I think since the 50s. But largely today, what's powered all of this research has been, the pursuit of general AI. But that might not be like, look, if we're at this stage of AI and the effects are this bad on segments of the population, we might want to rethink that strategy. And so I think that IA is actually something that is starting to take off. In my job right now, and for a company that I'm working for, IA is front and center with product teams. And so I think that's absolutely amazing. It's a platform that has over 300 million unique visitors every month. It's a big deal to start seeing this change in the industry. So I'm very, very excited to see that. So all you Palantir investors, you're going to like this. Um, okay, so Palantir has a really novel approach, in my opinion, that it's designed to not monetize user data. All their customers, they protect their data. It's purpose built for intelligence augmentation, right? So it's designed as a system to have human beings and machine learning interact in a positive feedback loop. Okay, and they're decentralized ontologies, meaning Palantir doesn't collect and store all. When customers use Palantir, they don't sign up on a platform and then all of their data goes into the platform. Okay, this is companies acquire the software, they run it on their own infrastructure, and Palantir doesn't use their data. So I think that's awesome. Something I didn't understand initially when I started looking into Palantir, but have since discovered, and I think that's amazing. They also support protection for civil liberties and privacy protections. You know, people may want to debate that, but I think it's fairly obvious if just listening to Alex Karp that they are serious about this, and also reading the book from Bowman and listening to Bowman's YouTube interviews, they're serious about this. They really do take privacy protections and protections for civil liberties really, really seriously at Palantir. So it's no coincidence that their platform is really the alternative platform to the AI-based solutions that we see out there today. And this is Courtney Bowman. Guy's awesome. I'm really enjoying his book again. He leads a team at Palantir for privacy protections and advocating changes in the industry for how we treat customer data. So check out his videos. He's on YouTube too. You can see videos if you just search for him. Some really neat discussions he's had in the past with people. So definitely get familiar with Courtney Bowman if you don't know who he is. This article, also, Palantir Rising War in the Garden of Google. This actually inspired me to make this video at the end of the day. I was like, wow, this guy did a really good job of sort of outlining all of the sort of history of Google competing with Palantir, of Google's approach versus Palantir's approach. It's a must read. I had my software engineering teams read it. Like, I really think this is it. It's not like technically maybe the best analysis. There's plenty of room to debate the technical merit of some of the analysis, but I think at a sort of philosophical level, it's a really good piece. Kind of read it like poetry or something. But it's a great article. I would definitely read it. But Palantir does threaten this paradigm. They are taking a stand against the biggest names in tech on this issue, and it's a serious issue for the reasons that I've already mentioned. And then there's hints of this. Like if you know the background of all this stuff and then you watch that Alex Karp interview, you're going to get a whole different perspective on what he's saying. But I really think you could distill it down into this one statement. Okay, so I'm just going to read it real quick. I think that governments have to be involved. Clearly, Silicon Valley seems to believe that self-regulation is a concept that doesn't mean much. Over time, it will lead to totally dystopian discussions. There's so much to unpack in there. It's really difficult to try and explain it all right now, but I'll try and explain some of this. But I think he's advocating, number one, for regulation for the reasons I brought up in this video, that AI left in the hands of private companies may not produce very good results for people over time. And the dystopian discussions we're going to get into, right? So let's talk about those. Terrifying future. Right now, if you are a citizen in China, you live in China, you are being subjected to AI. Okay, so it's a surveillance state that's always on. They're using products built by US companies. This is a fact. I don't want to have political debates on the channel. It's just a fact of what's happening. But I also want you to understand that, like, because social media is so good at knowing who you are once you're engaged with the platform, that you could have governments all over the world that mandate participation in these platforms because it allows them to power citizen scores. They don't need to worry about someone reporting you to the authorities anymore. They will know everything about you and everything you say and everything you do. So that's terrifying to think that a government would not give you the choice to use these tools, to use these platforms, to engage with AI. They would mandate that you engage with AI as a form of social control. And you really need to take this seriously. I'm not the only person talking about this kind of thing. It's in the tech industry. There are a lot of conversations going on about this. So I highly encourage you to think about a future in which governments have the power of AI at their disposal and they use it against their own citizens. Another thing to keep in mind is that private companies currently have they've cornered the market on AI. The government doesn't really have an ability to regulate them in any way. And like, let's say Google comes up with general AI tomorrow. They don't own any share in Boston Dynamics anymore, but imagine, companies that are putting AI into the world in your daily lives. And, getting back to that point about governments, it's not a good partnership. I don't like this idea that private companies could have a power greater than the atomic bomb in their hands, and they get to choose what to do with it, which with the governments they choose to do it with. That's already not working out. Like, we've already seen how this technology is being abused, and I think that's just terrifying. And an even more terrifying thing is that today's AI is stupid. Okay, like, today's AI is largely what I just showed you, an application of graph theory on huge amounts of data. We haven't even really had major I mean, there's been some breakthroughs, but we haven't had like huge breakthrough. We have general purpose AI that is powerful as, say, the marginal worker, and can transform, society. But we're getting there. I mean, we may end up there in 50 years, and that's really kind of scary to think about, just how dumb today's AI is, yet how profound an impact it can have on society. So just keep that in mind. So conclusions here, um, engineers, if you're concerned about the effects of AI research and data privacy, you need to speak up in your organizations. It's incumbent on you to read up on this stuff too. Like, I'm speaking directly to engineers that are out there. No one's going to do it for you. Regulators, you will always outpace the regulators. It's on your shoulders to try and make a difference in the industry. And investors need to consider the human cost of their returns. And what I mean by that is that, the products they're investing in are having huge negative impacts both here in the United States and in other countries. And they need to maybe rethink whether or not they just throw money at the next greatest social media application or the latest and greatest AI thing without talking to the leadership teams about what they think about these issues. Because I don't want to empower leaders who don't care about these issues or who are, like, trying to pursue returns at any human cost. I think that it's super dangerous, and we need to have more responsible leadership, and investors need to start thinking about the people they're investing in and where they stand on these issues. Governments need to take stronger action. I totally believe that regulation is required on some level. Just looking at the effects on young girls with social media, maybe there are age limitations that need to be placed on the platform. Maybe there is more openness and transparency in how data is being used. Maybe we just tell companies you can't collect user data, or maybe we adopt something that's more like GDPR here in the United States, and we get serious about data privacy and protections. But I think there's a role for government. I think other countries have recognized that already, in helping protect privacy and data. And I think Palantir is probably the industry leader in AI ethics after watching all kinds of talks from all various experts from all these different companies and having worked with some of them myself. I haven't worked with Palantir, but I'm just saying, having worked with people myself who work at these companies, other companies besides Palantir, they really do appear to be the AI ethics leader, which is funny because they've been the subject of so much controversy. They clearly, to me, know the potential for abuse here. They're serious about it, and they're challenging the big names to step up to the plate and protect civil liberties and protect privacy. And I think that's awesome. So if we could all do a little more of that as engineers, to maybe ask some questions about, like, does this app I'm building feel creepy in some way? Like, maybe I shouldn't build it. Like, if the value that you're delivering isn't huge, maybe you shouldn't build that app, or maybe you should find a way to support decentralization and not require customer information at all. Get on the crypto wallet train early, because maybe you put the company farther out and ahead of that innovation. But there's a lot we can do, I think, as engineers to kind of follow Palantir's lead here, and get serious about this. So hope you guys liked the video. Lots more videos coming, so stay tuned.